Welcome! We are continuing to work through Daniel chapter 11, and in this video we'll be analyzing verses 6 to 8. Let's begin by quickly recapping everything that has happened thus far. So we begin with the Persian Empire, which Alexander the Great conquers. When Alexander dies, this triggers a series of conflicts between his generals, which culminates in his empire being broken into 4 major units. Of these units, the Bible is only concerned with the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire. The author of Daniel will refer to the king of the Seleucid Empire as the king of the north, and the king of the Ptolemaic Empire as the king of the south. It makes sense why the author uses these titles, as from the perspective of someone living in Israel, the Seleucid king is literally the king in the north, and the Ptolemaic king is literally the king in the south. Now, these titles of King of the North and King of the South are very important, and they're going to be used throughout Daniel. So therefore, it's important that we know that the title King of the North and King of the South do not refer to just one individual. Rather, it refers to whoever is on the throne at that time. And since Daniel 11 covers quite a bit of history, there are going to be many different kings of the North and the South. For the Seleucid Empire, the title King of the North will initially refer to Seleucus I, and then the title will be applied to all of his successors until we get to Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Likewise, for the Ptolemaic Empire, the title King of the South is first used for Ptolemy I and then continues all the way down until we get to Ptolemy VIII. Goldingay writes in his commentary, quote, "In chapter 11, the southern king and the northern king are generic terms to refer to the current occupants, whoever they may be, of the Ptolemaic throne in Egypt and the Seleucid throne in Syria and Babylonia. The 2 realms lie on either side of Palestine and thus directly concern Judea." End quote. Now, chapter 11 of Daniel is going to go into a lot of detail about the conflicts between the Seleucid and Ptolemaic empires. These conflicts are known as the Syrian Wars, and there are 6 of them in total. Now, most of these wars are described in some detail in Daniel chapter 11, so by the end of this series of videos, you're going to be an absolute expert on these Syrian wars. Okay, let's now set up the board. We begin with Ptolemy I and Seleucus I on the throne. Let's now read verse 6, which says, "After some years they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to ratify the agreement. But she shall not retain her power, and his offspring shall not endure. She shall be given up, she and her attendants and her child and the one who supported her." End quote. Now, without historical background, it's not possible to understand what this verse is saying. So what we're going to have to do is dig into the history here. So let's begin by reading from Appian of Alexandria, a 2nd century Greek historian who documents this time period. Appian writes the following. "After the death of Seleucus, the kingdom of Syria passed in regular succession from father to son as follows. The first was the same Antiochus who fell in love with his stepmother, to whom was given the surname of Soter, Saviour, for driving out the Gauls who had made an incursion into Asia from Europe." End quote. It's also during this time that Ptolemy I's son, Ptolemy II, succeeds him as well. And our first Syrian war breaks out between these 2 kings. But this conflict isn't mentioned in Daniel chapter 11, so we're just going to skip over it. So let's now continue reading from Appian, who writes, "The second was another Antiochus, born of this marriage, who received the surname of Theos, divine, from the Milesians, in the first instance, because he slew their tyrant Timarchus." End quote. It's also during this time that the second Syrian war occurs between Antiochus II Theos and Ptolemy II. But again, the Bible doesn't mention it. As Newsom writes in her commentary, the author passes over the First and Second Syrian Wars, focusing on the dynastic marriage in 250 BCE, by which this period of conflict was temporarily ended. So Daniel 11 skips over the First and Second Syrian Wars, but then focuses on this dynastic marriage in 250 BCE between the 2 empires. This dynastic marriage between the 2 kingdoms most likely functioned as a peace treaty between the 2 kingdoms after the Second Syrian War, just to make peace. Appian writes of this marriage, "This Theos was poisoned by his wife. He had 2 wives, Laodice and Bernice. The former a love match, the latter a daughter pledged to him by Ptolemy. Laodice assassinated him, and afterwards Bernice and her child." End quote. Now, what Appian has written here is very important to us, so let's slowly break it down. Let's put Ptolemy on one side and Antiochus Theos on the other. Theos's first wife is Laodice, and they have a son, Seleucus II. And Ptolemy II also has a son called Ptolemy III, and also a daughter named Bernice. Now, Appian tells us that Bernice is given in marriage to Theos. Appian writes that Theos had two wives, Laodice and Bernice, the former Laodice, a love match, the later Bernice, a daughter pledged to him by Ptolemy. So, Bernice marries Theos, and we know that Bernice and Theos have a child, which they call Antiochus. Now, Appian tells us that this Theos is poisoned by his wife, and it goes on to specify that Laodice assassinated him, and afterwards Bernice and her child. So it's pretty clear what's happened here. Laodice, the first wife, is upset that her husband has married another woman. And she's also probably afraid that her son, Seleucus II, isn't going to take the throne. So she decides to kill her husband, Theos, then she kills Bernice, and then kills the child as well. And by doing this, she has secured the throne for her own son, Seleucus II. But remember, she has just killed Bernice, who is a member of the Ptolemaic family. So when Ptolemy III takes the throne in Egypt and learns that Laodice has killed his sister, he is very upset, and he wages a war against the Seleucid Empire. Appian writes, Ptolemy III, the son of Philadelphus, Ptolemy II, avenged these crimes by killing Laodice. He invaded Syria and advanced as far as Babylon. So the death of Bernice triggers the Third Syrian War, which is also known as the Laodicean War because Laodice started it by killing Bernice. And in this war, Ptolemy III invades well into the Seleucid Empire. Okay, let's stop here. With all this information now, let's rewind and go back to the end of the Second Syrian War, in which Ptolemy II and Antiochus II Theos are upon the throne. Let's now read verse 6 of Daniel and see if it makes sense in light of all of this new information. So we read, After some years they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to ratify the agreement. So what is Daniel 11 telling us here? As we did before, let's put Ptolemy on one side and Theos on the other. We know that Theos has a wife, Laodice, and a son, Seleucus II, and that Ptolemy has a son, Ptolemy III, and a daughter, Bernice. Verse 6 says that the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to ratify the agreement. So the daughter of the king of the south is Bernice, and the verse is telling us that she will go to the king of the north. And this is clearly referring to marriage. This is also a very common practice of the time for kings to give their daughter in marriage to broker a peace deal. So when it says to ratify the agreement, it's most likely referring to the fact that this marriage was a peace offering after the Second Syrian War between the two empires. We also know that Bernice and Theos have a child as well. Okay, let's keep reading verse 6. It continues, But she shall not retain her power, and his offspring shall not endure. She shall be given up, she and her attendants, and her child, and the one who supported her. End quote. So this is telling us that Bernice dies and her child dies as well. Now, chapter 11 doesn't specify who kills her and her child, but in light of Appian's account, we know that it's Theos's first wife Laodice who kills Bernice and also kills the child. And because she's killed them, Laodice's son now can become the new king. We now go into verse 7, which reads, In those times a branch from her roots shall rise up in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north. He shall take action against them and prevail. Now, the phrase, a branch from her roots, is a reference to Bernice's brother, Ptolemy III, who, when he takes the throne of Egypt, avenges the murder of his sister. He does this by invading the Seleucid Empire, which begins the Third Syrian War. In verse 8, we read the following, Even their gods, with their idols and with their precious vessels of silver and gold, he shall carry off to Egypt as spoils of war. End quote. So this is referring to the fact that Ptolemy III is victorious in the Third Syrian War and is able to conquer a large amount of the Seleucid Empire. Now you must be impressed with the accuracy of Daniel 11 here. Having now gone through the historical context, verses 6 and 8 make perfect sense and align with the historical record. So now you can understand why Newsom writes on Daniel chapter 11 that the historical details are so precise and so generally accurate that scholars have cogently argued that the author must have had access to a chronicle of the history of the Seleucid and Ptolemaic political and military interactions. End quote. And that's where we'll end this video. As always, if you're enjoying these videos and you would like me to continue creating them, your support would be greatly appreciated. So please consider supporting me on Patreon. The link is in the description. If donating isn't something you're able to do, it's still tremendously helpful if you hit that like button and leave some comments below. And finally, make sure you're subscribed to get my next video. So with all that being said, thank you for watching all the way until the end. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.